Hello everybody. We got a lot of people joining us today. If you're new, I'm Scott. I'm with Artist Network, and we've been doing this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the last, was it 5 weeks now? I think we're on week 6. Today we are working on a self-portrait, and I don't think I've ever been more scared to do a drawing than right at this moment. So I appreciate all the positive support. Welcome everybody. I see a lot of familiar names and faces. Jam, I just saw your comment about turning me into a swarthy seaman on a windy sail. So I really hope I get to see that. So on that note, we're at Artist Network. We're working on hopefully trying to figure out soon how we can start to share our work with each other, post images and some comments, because I'd love to see what you're all working on. Some people have found me on Instagram and have tagged me on the work that they're posting, and it's been really awesome to see what has been coming out of this series. So today, working on this self-portrait, you'll find the image in the description for the video if you'd like to use this. As I say in most of my videos, I really recommend working from life as much as possible. And of course, this is a self-portrait, so you wouldn't be able to work directly from me sitting in front of you. But if you can work from a mirror, do your own self-portrait, a lot of what I'll be covering today will be applicable. I'm going to try to talk in general enough terms that you'll be able to apply this to pretty much any subject, any portrait subject. So self-portraits, portraits in general, really put our drawing skills to the test because they, you really need to be able to apply all of the tools that we've covered so far. I'll be working in charcoal today because it shows well on camera, but if you're working in graphite or any other material, like I said, a lot of the stuff will apply. I like to work both positively and negatively, so you'll see me use my rubber and kneaded erasers. I've got my shading stumps, which I'm going to be using a lot in this, and doing a few tests for this video. I found that one of the things that I really struggle with is value control in a portrait. I tend to make things a lot darker than they actually are. And so working with these shading stumps as drawing tools helps me to create a lighter mark. And I'm going to talk through that a little bit as well. I've got vine charcoal for early stages, and I've got my compressed charcoal sticks. I ran out of my 2Bs and I can't get to the store. I like to shop at my local art supply store rather than ordering them off of Amazon. And so I've got my 4B here. So my 2B has run out. It's going to work just great. So welcome everybody. If you have any questions, feel free to call it out in the chat field. So when I'm looking off to my left, that's what I'm looking at right now. I'm not seeing any comments. Thank you for the support, Jen. I appreciate it. We'll see what we can do. So I'm going to get right into it now. You might be able to see on my page, I started to try to think through some of the early proportions in the portrait, and if you've been following along in the series, you'll know that these initial marks that we're making are more about getting our thoughts in order than getting our drawing in order. We really don't want to be locking ourselves to anything early on. I'm going to be going through these proportions over and over and over again. What's most critical right now is I want to make sure that the top of the head and the chin are going to fit on the page. I'm placing this a little bit off to the right, giving myself a little bit more room on the left to kind of look into. So just as a kind of conceptually, I'm thinking that I like the contrast between a vertical portrait placed on a horizontal field and then giving myself in the portrait some space to kind of project into rather than kind of cropping things off right up against it. So that's kind of some of the things I'm thinking about early on as I'm placing the head. So again, kind of thinking kind of top of the head, chin, and then placing the eyes. Now, a general proportion that you want to be aware of is that the eyes fall in the middle of the head. So if we look here, if we measure the distance from the chin to, I like the bridge of the nose, which is right aligned with the center of the eyes. If I take that measurement and I transfer it up, the top of the head is placed somewhere here. Now, not to be confused with the top of the hair, right? So if I visualize the scalp or the skull kind of continuing on through, the top of the head is somewhere right around in here. And so I can start to apply that to my general proportions as well. So if I look at some of these marks I'm making, here, just using the shading stump because it makes a fairly light mark. And it has a little bit of control. I could be using the vine charcoal as well. So this, again, this is kind of just getting me thinking about where things might go, and it's starting to build up some of that muscle memory. If I do it once, I'm more likely to repeat it. So if I can kind of get this line in here, I'm going to make it all disappear in a bit. Thinking about also transferring angles, so using, this is called angle sighting. So if I take this measurement here, this angle, and I carry it across to my drawing, I can start to visualize that path, not thinking about all the subtle curves along the jawline and the cheek. I'm just thinking about these general directions, and I can apply that to these angles as well. And again, this is just kind of thinking through this. The more time you spend on the proportions, the better. You're going to find that the details all come in line more effortlessly as you work through the proportions. If you keep your mindset on getting those proportions correct throughout the whole drawing, you'll find that you need far fewer details than you might have originally thought. So now I'm starting to think through kind of the thickness of the hair, you know, visualizing again the top of the head. One of the things you'll see in this series as well is when we confront curves, you know, whether it's an orange or a cup or whatnot, thinking about it as a sequence of short, straight marks that accumulate together. So I want to think that same way as well, thinking more angularly at this point. Let's see, trying to visualize some of these other planes in the drawing. So like here, what I'm doing here, where if I'm looking at this line, I'm visualizing a line from the right side of my chin up through the cheekbone, and you can see that it almost perfectly reflects this line here. And then, but this whole area is very kind of, there's no real sharp defining point there. I'm just trying to visualize that general shape. I'm not even drawing eyes, nose, mouth at this point. Just trying to think of general head shape. Some points that you might be able to identify is if you look at this distance here, you can take that distance and carry it across. And in this case, the distance from corner to corner of the eye is about equivalent then to from the corner of the eye to the edge of the ear. And so if I start to just kind of indicate that, it gives me kind of a mark that I can use to say the ear is going to go somewhere over here. This is all going to go away in a few minutes because I'm going to wash this all out with a wash of vine charcoal. So I'm just kind of getting my bearings here as much as possible. And starting to suggest some of the forms. So hopefully you can start to see the structure of the head forming. I'm not focusing on the nose and the mouth at this point. I want to get the eyes locked down, and I want to get that chin, because it's all about establishing parameters. And then within that, if I know that these are placed correctly, then it's a matter of breaking this zone down further to find out where the nose and the mouth go. So one of the things that I also did when I took this photo, I was really looking at the alternating sequence between light and dark. So there's this value here. As we kind of transition across, it gets a little bit lighter here, but kind of slightly darker along this edge. There's a fall off happening where there's more light here in the forehead, gradually getting darker towards the chin. And then we see some light striking here, some shadow shapes, and then light here as well. So we have this alternating sequence of light and dark, and I might amplify that a little bit. So maybe darkening this side a bit more to create some contrast against the light on this side of the head, transitioning into shadow, and then coming into the light in that background. So that's really what I want to start to do now, is with my soft vine charcoal, starting to build up value. And just thinking very broadly. So this is now making a mess. But getting rid of that white of the page is going to be really helpful. And I'm going to create that fall off here. So kind of isolating this, kind of keeping this a little bit kind of open. That's the forehead right there. And I can still see lightly some of the lines that I had established earlier. But I'm not worried about preserving them because they weren't accurate. They were close. And now this pass here is just about kind of smoothing things out a little bit because that first pass with the vine charcoal was was pretty rough. All right, looking here to see if there's any comments or questions. Do I include the bulk of the hair when measuring the proportions? That's what Vivica seems to be asking. I do, to some degree. I at least want to know that everything's going to fit on the page, and you're going to see me kind of start to refine that a little bit more. Getting that hairline is going to be kind of important, so I want to get that kind of marked on the page. But this is, again, kind of, this stage is all about getting rid of that white, building up value. This doesn't have to take a whole lot of time, so we'll try to get through it. Trying a new paper today. This is actually a bamboo paper. I think I might have used it in one of the other videos. Let me show you what I'm talking about, though, so that, because you're thinking, what, a bamboo? But it's this Hanamulla bamboo, so it's actually, is it what, 90% bamboo fiber and then 10% cotton rag? And I'm excited to see how it works. And so far, it seems to be really receiving the charcoal well, and I can erase back nicely, similar to a rag paper. And seems to work out really well for the charcoal. This is interesting what's happening here. I'm getting in this dark spot that I can't seem to get rid of, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to get back to that later. In each of these layers of vine charcoal, I like to think of this whole process kind of like I don't know why, but I refer to it as kind of seasoning. I'm getting the paper ready to accept the charcoal. As you build up these layers, it just gets softer and softer, and I really like how that works with the charcoal. So you can start to see in the fog here. This alternating sequence of dark, and light. So now we have the light on the portrait, the shadow side, the form shadow of the portrait, and then light in that background. And a lot of this is just to help me as I start to get into the details. This lays the groundwork for interpreting the values more effectively. Because as I focus, if I were to focus on this area, it becomes really difficult to see how those values relate within the context of that fall off I was talking about. And it's very hard to see what that actual value is. So if I establish that fall off early on, it's going to help me in the end. That's one of the things I see myself do a lot as in portraiture. I tend to exaggerate the features by making them too dark, and I want to be really subtle with that. So now that I have this kind of washed out, I'm going to get back in and redefine it. And I've got enough charcoal built up on this shading stump that I can continue to make my marks. So here's where I'm kind of looking at the thickness of the hairline again. And I can see some of my marks still on the page. I think what I'd like to do, actually I think I don't have quite enough charcoal on the shading stump, so I'm going to start to block in the shapes, the shadow shapes. And I'll start with the eyes, kind of following along there. And what you're going to see is that I don't like to actually draw the features at this stage. I want to think about the overall shape of light and shadow. Trying to think very generally and abstractly about the forms. So now, like as I start to indicate a plane for the nose, I'm kind of looking at the angle of the shadow. I'm not looking at the length yet. because so I'm going to kind of float around the drawing, trying to indicate marks. So as I start to indicate where the chin will go, I'm trying to indicate where that line is, that path, but then I need to measure where along that path that chin is actually going to be. And sometimes I need to establish more landmarks to make that happen. So now what I'm doing is I'm kind of anchoring the eyebrow on the left, right here, and that'll be a bit of an anchor point for me. And I can look at the proportions within the context of that. So since I have my printout to the left of me, one of the things that can be really helpful, maybe if I can bring this in a little bit, you can start to see it, with the two side by side. One of the helpful techniques in terms of getting the angles and the proportions right is to actually put my focus right here. So I'm looking in between the two, and I'm trying to then put my awareness on both the photo and the drawing at the same time. So if I can, it helps me to kind of shift back and forth between the reference photo and the drawing very quickly. So trying to spend some time like looking in between them, but putting my awareness on the edge. And if I'm drawing the line here, I'm trying to be aware of the angles. If I'm looking at the angles, then I'm trying to draw with my peripheral vision a bit. And that's kind of essentially a form of angle sighting. So rather than physically taking my material and transferring it over, transferring those angles over, I'm doing that visually. So it's a lot of looking very quickly back and forth to see how things kind of line up. The chin is a really kind of a soft edge. It's hard to know exactly where that is. So I'm trying to let my drawing reflect that as well. I might come in and refine that a little bit. Let's see. Looking at this angle here, the forehead. Keeping these marks really light because I want these lines to ultimately get kind of consumed by that background. But you can see how effective right now. I have in front of me on the screen, I have a kind of a projection of from the camera here, and it's smaller, so it gives me the effect of stepping back. So if you don't have that, this is a good time to kind of start to look at it from a distance and see how it holds up. But you can see already with just these simple shapes, we see that face emerging. It's part of our brain that is developed very early on. It helps us to recognize faces. One of the things that we, as infants, is the second you're born, we're born with an instinct to look for this alternating pattern of dark shapes. So we see the two, we see the line for a shadow for the nose, and a shape for the mouth. And we look for that pattern of dark shapes, and that's what connects us to our parents when we're born, your mother in particular, Sue. So we look for that, and that's the same mechanism that allows us to see shapes, faces in rocks and trees and things like that. Is that it's a really cool thing that we never lose that. We're born with it. So we try to use that to our advantage when you're working with a portrait. Is that you don't need a whole lot. You just need to get this pattern right. So now what I want to do is I'm going to start to indicate shapes for the nose and the mouth. And I want to get myself in the ballpark and then start to evaluate and adjust from there. So if I'm happy, if I know that this distance here is correct, that's the top of the head, so maybe the hairline comes up a little bit. I'm going to leave this line indicates the skull, top of the hair, bottom of the hair, and here's the chin. And if the eyes kind of are placed right there in the middle, I can then break this zone up a little bit. And often what a general proportion you can look for is to break the head then into 3 equal thirds. So from the chin to the nose to the middle of the forehead to the top of the hairline here. And that's a general proportion that can sometimes get us in the ballpark, and then you can start to look for the specific proportions from there. So in this case, what I'm looking for is this distance from tip of the nose to the chin, measuring up from the tip of the nose into the forehead. It gets me almost right there in the middle. So if I find the middle of the forehead, I can start to compare that down. So where I have the tip of the nose now, if I take that same measurement now down here, then the chin would need to drop down. If I'm confident in the placement of the chin, then I need to start to adjust that. And so I think that nose kind of actually needs to come up a little bit. It's also really important to help kind of pay attention to where you might be consistently off in your proportions. And for me, I always make the nose too long initially, and then I overcorrect and make it too short. So I'm going to try to really be careful right now and make it make it more accurate. I just know I make the same mistake over and over again. And so then I have placed the mouth there, and I can start to evaluate from there. I think at this point, though, what I want to do is I want to start to refine these shapes. And I'm going to continue to use the vine charcoal and my shading stump to do that. Trying to think still generally about the form, but now since I have this shadow shape blocked in, I can start to refine that a little bit more, and I'm going to work my way from the center out. Now here I'm thinking about the roundness of the eye. I have the video that we did a couple weeks ago on drawing an eye that might be helpful if you need to add a bit more detail. I'm trying not to focus on detail in this drawing. This is about getting those general proportions right, because you get them right and you're gold. The proportions are ultimately the most valuable part of a portrait drawing, getting those proportions right. You get those right, and that's the essential aspect of creating the likeness. You can draw a person's eye that looks exactly like their eye, but if everything else in the portrait is out of proportion, then it's not going to look like that person, even if that eye looks exactly like their eye. But so you got to get the proportions right in order to create that likeness, and that's what makes this so intimidating. We're highly sensitive to subtle changes in a person's facial features. We see expressions, and we see just a slight twitch to the mouth or a squint to the eye, and we can sense that, we can see that, and that's what makes portrait drawing a challenge. Is that you got to get those, the slightest change to the angle of the mouth, and all of a sudden the expression completely changes, or it may even look like another person. So I'm trying to keep these light and loose, and then gradually build the darks here. Looking through for some comments. I'm not seeing any questions. Hello. Well, we got people from all over: Japan, Greece, all over the U.S. All right. Trinidad. Welcome, everybody. I enjoy seeing new faces here. Let's see. I've got these two shading stumps. This one's been beat to heck quite a bit. So, and you can see that I'm keeping the edge of the nose really light. We have a tendency in portraiture. We know the angle of this nose exists. And so often an instinct is to draw that line, and we tend to make it too dark. And so I'm really trying to fight that instinct and keep that very subtle and soft. What's ultimately going to make that nose come out is getting the shadows right, especially underneath the nose. So as I'm looking at the shadow underneath the nose, I'm looking at it in relation to the eye above it, trying to do a kind of some plumb lines there. Trying to do some angle sighting, looking at this angle across here to find the edge of the nostril. And if I measure up from the nostril, does that align with that shadow shape? And I think it does. Here's the inside, and we see this nice sharp highlight right in here. That's going to be great. I'm going to kind of indicate that as a landmark. Measuring down, I'm kind of looking for the cheekbone and some of those angles. Again, keeping these marks light and loose. A lot of this still is about getting my thinking in line rather than making accurate marks. And trying not to sit in one spot too long. But everything becomes a landmark at some point. You're always creating a relationship between one part and the next. And so, you know, you're constantly moving around and adjusting and saying, is this in the right spot relative to this? You know, what's the angle across here? Is that correct? So if I go like this, if I take an angle sight measurement from the nostril to the corner of the eye, does that get me in the ballpark? It gets me in the ballpark. And so this shadow might need to come out a little bit more because the corner of the eye is in that shadow. Measuring down from the eye to find the corner of the mouth. So I'm looking at this right here, taking a plumb measurement. So the pupil is right in line with the corner of the mouth. So if the pupil is somewhere right around in here, the corner is going to be somewhere around here. I think what I need to do is I need to get more charcoal on my shading stump. That's what I'm doing now. I'm kind of smoothing out the background, just picking up charcoal. And now looking for the lips. You know, another tendency that I see in portraiture is to outline the lips, outline the nose. Instead, I want to think about the general shadow shapes. And what we see in the reference photos is alternating sequence of light here, shadow in the upper lip as that falls under. And so that falls into shadow. The light catches the lower lip and then casts a shadow underneath it. And so I want to find the right shapes there and indicate those shadow shapes before I start to render anything. And then looking at the lips, because this is a 3/4 view, there's an asymmetry, looking for the center of the lips, and knowing on the right, we're seeing more of it as it wraps around. As we wrap around this side of the head, we're seeing a much shorter section of the lip, the upper lip. I'm going to place a line here for this shadow, and I can adjust it. And what we see here is that in this lower lip, it really kind of wraps around, and it's a very soft transition in here. And now I haven't really refined this edge. You know, that just wipes it out completely. What I can do is if I've placed the features accurately, I'm going to cut this down. I can measure out to find the cheekbone, the jawline, etc. Because another tendency as well is to actually make the face a bit too wide. And so I find myself constantly trying to cut back in and find the correct proportions for the outer edge. Kind of lost that chin, but you can see the portrait kind of forming already without having to do a whole lot. I haven't drawn a line yet. I'm just trying to think about shadow shapes. Lines are going to come in to play soon. I need to get a little bit more charcoal on there. I've kind of run my shading stump dry. Now I'm trying to think through this shadow shape. So this encapsulates the form shadow on the chin and the jaw, and then the cast shadow onto the neck. And then what I can look for here is I look for the neck where it aligns with the other features. So if I take a vertical line, kind of aligns with this part of the kind of the tear duct of the eye. So I can bring that down, and there's this kind of a slight angle. I've been finding that this whole series, talking through everything as I go, actually helps me to focus quite a bit more than when I'm just kind of working on my own. I find my mind wanders, it gets distracted by other things. Often I'm, watching Tiger King or something, right? And my brain is kind of slightly distracted, and I start to fall into the kind of muscle memory at that point. And so talking through it has been really helpful, and you might find that helpful for you as well. It might be a little intimidating or embarrassing at first, but if it's just you drawing, kind of talk through and say, I'm drawing the shadow on the cheekbone right now. It's this shape, it's in this spot, and kind of give yourself some verbal cues to help kind of talk through it, and you might find that it brings you additional focus. All right, starting to think about the bulk of the hair. Just moving back and forth. I forgot to mention how much I'm squinting at the same time. I like to have my students too sometimes really actually just practice squinting, and squinting your eyes to limit the amount of light coming in, and then opening them wide and blurring your vision to flood it with light, and see how that impacts your interpretation of the subject. So you might see me do that. I kind of make the goofiest faces sometimes. And if you see me doing that, that's ultimately what I'm going for. Is trying to see the subject in as many different ways as possible. Coming across here to see that the line of the shirt is aligned with the chin here. Also thinking about the negative space in here to help with that neckline. All right, now thinking kind of shape of the ear, and I love how the ear in the reference photo, we transfer from shadow, and then we hit some light kind of striking in there. The ears generally fall between the eyes and the nose, are about the same height as the eyes and the nose. There's a kind of a slight angle here, so I'm going to look across, take a horizontal measurement to align it with the nose, and realize that my ear was too high. Keep that in shadow. All right, I've got some more charcoal on the page. I can pick that up with the shading stump. Start to think through some of the proportions again. How's everybody doing? Is it okay to blend with your finger? It is. I mean, I've done that. I did that for years, but one of the things you want to be really careful with is if you have any oils on your fingers, what it can do is it can impact, depending on the type of the paper, it can impact how the charcoal receives the paper. I often do that. I actually very rarely use a shading stump when I draw, because I like the tactile quality of getting charcoal on my hands. But I'm finding that the use of the shading stump as a drawing tool is really effective for me in controlling my values. And so that's kind of why I'm doing that here. So if I'm happy with that, I think I'm happy with that basic proportion there. And I can start to measure out to find the cheekbone, the jawline. Maybe come in a little bit. Again, trying to see these marks as a sequence of short, straight marks. That was the wrong angle there. One of the things you see, I remember watching a documentary looking at Leonardo's work, and they're trying to authenticate a Leonardo drawing. And in order to do that, what they did is they hired an artist to do a master copy of the work and see, what does that do? When you really study the marks, what does that do to your understanding of the artist that made them? And one of the things that this artist indicated is that Leonardo you would often make the same mistake. So one of the ways you would know it was a Leonardo drawing is that you see that a consistent correction of form. So he'd always get the chin and into the neck, that transition, that jawline, have to always kind of correct that in a specific way. Always draw it too big and then correct by cutting in. And I think about that often when I'm working and how I fall into this trap of making very consistent mistakes. And I think it's really helpful for you to really pay attention to that as well. All right. I think I actually need to start to pull out some of my charcoal pencils to start to refine some of these edges, but I want to be very careful with them. So I'm feeling pretty confident. Actually, I need to draw this shadow in here. It wraps around the orbit of the eye. It helps to create contrast against the nose. I'm feeling pretty confident in things so far. I'm going to hold off on really drawing the eyes. I need to get more charcoal on the page. So this is a 4B, so it's a pretty soft charcoal, and I'm really just utilizing the weight of the charcoal to make these marks. If I make this line too strong, it's gonna pop that edge forward and it's gonna flatten it out. I really want to create a sense that this is wrapping around. You have a front kind of plane of the face, and then it takes a corner around the cheekbone, back along the side of the head, and then we have the same thing over here. We have the cheekbone, and then it wraps around, and this is where we can use our control over contour edges to really suggest that three-dimensional form. So keeping that light, but it kind of sharpens that up. Looking for other sharp areas. There's this nice sharp line right there as we go into the eye socket. I have my pencil sharpened at both ends, so I can stick with this one for a while. When this one gets dull, I just switch it around. But I want to use the side because I don't want to get too bogged down in detail. Still trying to think about form. Not going to get the eyes really drawn in. Just trying to observe this general shape, and as much as I can, I'm trying to think about it as an abstract shape rather than say I'm drawing an eye. So I'm trying to kind of sneaking up on the eye and drawing the shape or the space around it, and I'm going to see how that serves me. So here we see that this part of the nose is in shadow, but we fall into a deeper shadow here in the eye socket. So I'm trying to represent that. And not assuming that the earlier marks that I made are correct. So you're always double checking. So here I'm using that kind of the light on the tear duct there as a landmark, measuring down, find the end of the nostril. And then the nose is really kind of a tricky form. I think it's healthy to spend more time on the shadow under the nose That's what I'm going to do here. I think I need to correct this a little bit. And pick up some charcoal here now and draw with it again. And if anything, I want to keep this edge of the face really kind of soft and less defined. If I sharpen up the nose and the mouth, that'll bring them forward and it'll create more of a three-dimensional effect. So I'm kind of looking at the screen. Let's see. And I'm starting to add a little bit more specificity, drawing in the nostril, looking at just this thin sliver of dark underneath the nose, transitioning into the nostril, trying to keep my awareness on that shadow underneath it. And that's pretty dark, so I think I can pick up some charcoal with my shading stump. And softening that. If you look on that forehead, you can see that there are some subtle variations in light and shadow. So we get a slight shadow here on the brow. It's really, there's a hot spot here. That's where the light is striking more strongly, so stronger. I can erase that out a little bit more. So I'm glad I got rid of that white early on, white of the page, because that would be really interfering with my understanding of the values. Now I'm just trying to observe the shadow shapes and refine them a little bit more. And this shading stump is really helpful to keep the values from getting too dark. Oh my gosh, there's just right now I just every part of me wants to go in and finish that eye, and I'm intentionally fighting that because first I want to make sure I've got the right proportions, I've got it placed in the right part of the head, and I'm not confident in that. I'm going to look at it from the distance. Kind of looks creepy without the eyes drawn in, rather soulless. And I see some of these great portrait artists, and man, I sometimes I just don't get it how they can do that. It's really tough work to do consistently, and I've made so many bad portraits that have taught me a lot. But man, it is a challenge. So hopefully you're being kind to yourself. If you're following along. If you're just joining us and you'd like to follow along, there's a reference photo in the description for the video. And one of the things that I often see too is, especially when drawing the lips, is to kind of exaggerate the corner of the mouth a bit more. It really kind of wraps around. We're going to see a highlight here, and then it falls into shadow as we wrap around, and it gets very soft as this lower lip kind of tucks in under here. And the same with the upper lip. There's a softness there. So that's one of the things that we often see is kind of just a kind of a harshness around the corner of the mouth. So just want to be mindful of that. All right. Seems like the nose is a bit short. I think you are right as well. But I don't have who said that? Deborah B. I think you're right as well. I think I need to kind of work my way around a bit more. I'm missing something in terms of the anchor point to help locate it. And maybe it's this angle sighting. let's see. Maybe if I just drop it down. Let's see, how does that work? So I'm seeing it's a generally horizontal kind of shadow shape under here. If anybody else sees a proportion that's off, feel free to shout out. One of the things that I didn't mention that I wanted to point out too as well is that I'm not doing myself any favors with the scale at which I'm drawing. The smaller you go, the proportionally, the more each mark has the potential to throw off the proportions in general. If I'm working on a giant portrait and you're off by 1/8 of an inch, it may not make a difference. 1/8 of an inch here could make a huge difference. And so that's something to consider as well. If you're kind of new to portraiture, perhaps work larger. It's a bit more forgiving in terms of those proportions. And you have a bit more kind of leeway in terms of getting them right. Thank you for correcting that. Yes, George, you're asking about using this in graphite. I think so as well. Graphite is a bit softer, and I think it actually lends itself nicely to portraiture so that you don't get too dark in certain areas. You want to preserve the darkest darks for just a few spots. And so how does that, is that better? Is that feeling like the nose is a bit better? I need to just lay down a little bit of charcoal here. So I'm just using the very most kind of subtle marks I can so that I don't overstate it. And if you see something, if you see a proportion off and you want to call it out, let me know. It's one of the advantages is that you have kind of an objective look. That's again one of the hardest parts, and we talk about this a lot in the other videos as well, is that we have this, we have a preconceived notion of how to draw things often. And a portrait is one of those. We have a sense of what we think we look like because we've been looking at ourselves for so long. But we want to check that, and often another person can be more objective and help with those proportions. Changing the context of your work is really helpful. So holding it upside down, holding it in a mirror, looking at it from a distance, those are all effective ways at changing the context so that you see the drawing in a new way, and you can check your assumptions. You know, the more I get into this drawing, the more I want to convince myself that everything is correct because I've gone through it so many times. Just want to kind of soften this, really emphasize that fall off. Again, the highlight down is stronger up in the forehead. Kind of giving myself a landmark over there. Is it feeling a little better? Let's see. Using this negative space to help me figure out how long that neck should be. I'm gonna go across here. What I need to do is actually some negative drawing in here. So erasing out that background to try to find that neckline. And all basically what I'm doing now is I was getting sucked into here, trying to correct all those proportions, and I need to give myself something else to focus on. Something feels kind of pinchy about the eye, so I need to correct this shadow shape here. Bring this down a little bit. I think I had tilted that eye up a bit too much. And depending on your screen, the reference image might look higher contrast than what I have. I'm kind of utilizing the printout a little bit more than the image. Again, kind of holding off on the eyes, trying to step back. Just looking at all these comments here, roughly speaking, how long is the stream going to be? This is going to be, where are we at right now? We're about 45 minutes in. So I imagine we're about halfway through, maybe a little less. So, but the recording is going to go up, so you can see that you can see the entire video once this is complete. If you can't stay for this now, you can always come back. It's saying the nose is better. All right. The bottom of the ear is too high compared to the base of the nose. I agree. Yes. I think it's got to come in somewhere around there. And this is all going to be in shadow, so I can build up some of the shadow shapes a bit more. The hair I'm going to come in a little bit later and work on. I'm just looking at some of these other comments. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing a tiny bit of the septum would be good. The base of the nostril aligns straight across to the base of the ear, but in the drawing, the ear seems too high. Yes. My painting is actually easier than drawing. Robert saying is why painting is easier than drawing. Yeah, there's a lot of like positive and negative work you can be doing in painting that I think is helpful. Yeah, with a painting you can always just scrape it down. All right. I want to kind of look at, there's kind of the shadow shape here. What's difficult in this large shadow shape here is really kind of locking into any specific landmark. So I'm trying to see it as a mass in the context of everything else. A lot of this is just very, very light work as I'm trying to visualize where everything goes. This can all fall into shadow. There's this kind of somewhat triangular shape in here. Now, trying to get a little bit more specific. And this is helpful sometimes in terms of correcting those proportions because you can see, right, as I look at some of these details in here, is everything still lining up? All right, that's feeling a little bit better. Hello, everybody. All right, so I laid down more charcoal here. I can shade this a bit, picking up more on the shading stump. And don't be afraid to just kind of take it down. Was it Robert, you were saying earlier about painting, you can always scrape it down, and that's a process I like to think about a lot when I'm drawing. And you saw that early on, kind of building up layers, and you'll see that in other of these drawings in this series, is kind of building it up, kind of taking it down, wiping it out, building it back up again, wiping it down. And that can be really helpful sometimes. Because again, if you do the foundation work, the details come in so much better towards the end. Darken this a bit. Let me see. Maybe darken this a touch just to create some contrast against that forehead. Just using the side of the pencil very lightly. Using the side of the fingers as much as possible versus the fingertips. They're just a little less oily there. All right, how's that feeling? I think it's feeling all right, a little bit better. The proportions might be a little bit off still, so I need to, maybe what I need to do is start to add a little bit of sharpness in some of these areas. With this being a relatively soft charcoal, 4B, it it lays down really easily. It's a bit of an angle to that lower lip that I want to try to capture. And then maybe just bring in detail right in the towards the front of the lips rather than, and then let it just kind of stay soft around the edge. Kind of like the atmosphere that's starting to form. And trying to be selective with that edge. So if you follow along this edge, it kind of disappears in some areas, gets a little bit sharper, softer, sharper again in other areas, and that's really going to hopefully bring more life to the drawing. And now let's see, I think I'm going to kind of accept at this point that some of these proportions are off. But I want to kind of move things along for everybody here and try to start to get into rendering some of the features. Like I said, it may be off still, but it is what it is. This is a live drawing session. Sometimes they don't work out, sometimes they do. Some things are going to be good, some things are going to need work. One of the things that I think is really critical, and I would tell my students quite a bit, is whenever you do a drawing and you're evaluating it, remember to observe what's going well as what's not. What's interesting is that I think students can often be hypercritical, and I think it's really important to know how your drawing can be improved so you can improve on it for the next one. But what's just as important is to identify what's going out well and why, so that you can intentionally repeat that for the next one. So hopefully that makes sense. Kind of measuring across to see where the top of the ear is visible. Doing some negative drawings to create that drawing, to create the ear, looking at the hair kind of shape around it. I'm trying to block in some of these. So drawing that hairline, really trying to keep it soft around the edges. In fact, maybe even calling it a hairline is not helpful. It's a term that, of course, that we use. But trying to think of it as a soft transition into the shape might be more valuable. I'm going to block that in. So I'm just using the side of the pencil here, which helps to keep it sharp for later on. And, somewhat trying to think of the flow of the hair, but I'm not really worried about it at this point. I'm going to kind of get into drawing hair a bit more, and then we're going to actually focus on that drawing hair specifically in another video. I'm anticipating Monday, but we'll see what how the schedule works out. Doing a drawing specifically of hair. I have a beautiful subject that I get to work from for that reference. Just trying to think through blocking that in. See how the general shape works. I feel like it's working out okay. One of the things I can see myself doing too is I'm working at it kind of an angle. I'm trying not to dip into the shot too much. So this is why having the projection in front of me is really helpful. Because working at it at an angle like this, I'm visually correcting the perspective, and then when I look up, I'm like, oh my gosh, everything is a bit more elongated than from the point of view that I'm working at right now. I think I can need to adjust this a little bit. Bring that in a little bit. All right. Patricia's asking what number pencil. I'm using a 4B right now, soft charcoal pencil. Kind of smoothing this out. And this is really helping me to pick up charcoal so I can draw with it a little bit more. I want to be careful not to have that hairline kind of stand out too much from the rest of the head. Oops, someone just knocked at the door, but I'll have to wait. Perhaps it's a delivery. So you can see the skull behind me. That's what we're working on Friday. I'm wicked excited about that one. That's going to be a lot of fun. Perhaps I should have reversed the order in the series here, but draw the skull beforehand. So I want to make sure that the forehead rounds out. There is kind of a flatness to it, but it also kind of curves around. So I'm trying to see the planes of the forehead. All right, and I think the hair's still quite a mess, but we haven't really corrected that. We're just kind of blocking in that shape. But I think we're at the point now where I can start to add some of the details. I think I'm going to come back in and kind of darken in some of these areas a little bit, trying to see the overall shadow shape. I'm blocking this in. I want to create that fall off so it's kind of exaggerated at this point, but I can come in and pull out some of the highlights. All right, let's see. Now maybe what I can do is get in there and work on these eyes, really looking at the shape of the eye, working at a 3/4. And this is where I find myself really struggling, I think, actually I drew that first part too high. What I tend to do is exaggerate them and make the darks too dark. I want to try to not get bogged down too much in the details. If I can get the basic shadow shapes right in there as well. Keep this light and loose. Don't over-render. So I'm just using pressure. Just using pressure to create light marks here. I want to think about the eyebrow as well to make sure that negative space in the upper eyelid is correct. Feeling pretty good about it. The eye is a ball. It wraps around, so this is really falling into shadow. And in fact, you can see that the light on the lower eyelid is brighter and more intense than the white of the eye. So try to prevent yourself from overstating that. Let's see what happens if we just keep that subtle. How's that? That looks unsettling, in my opinion. Something seems off there. So this is where we can kind of take that out, take another stab at it. What is off? I think let's see here. Need to bring this in a little bit. Looking for that shadow shape. We erase out that lower eyelid. This is where, you know, the slightest difference, because this is such a small area, the slightest difference is going to have a complete, you know, it's going to completely change the expression. So I'm just kind of erasing out the highlights and trying to build that from with a sense of light and shadow. In a way, kind of knocking that out a little bit more helps with the eyes. Taking my kneaded eraser and kind of forming it down into a point. And drawing that. All right, let's see. I think this eye is migrated up. So I need to be careful of that. What are we seeing? All right. Sonia is asking, do I feel the friction over the shading stump? I absolutely do. I love it as a drawing tool, actually. I'm finding a lot of joy in working with it. I'm just trying to pull out some of this form, trying to be really subtle and sensitive to this, because my tendency is to over-exaggerate and over-define things. And it's just amazing to me how much an expression can change, or the person itself can change. Kind of lost that shadow shape a little bit, so I'm kind of doing some negative drawing here. I think I had darkened that too much, and my observation of the fall off, I think I had darkened it too much. So what's nice about the kneaded eraser is I can lift off. So this one may take a little bit longer. Look at that. That completely changed the lip there. These tiny little adjustments. It's pretty wicked. So I have to hopefully practice what I preach here and try to be kind to ourselves as we're working on these things. Stop looking at this and being very critical right now. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. So I'm kind of erasing out that shape. I've kind of lost some of the subtlety that I had established earlier. I'm feeling a little bit better about that mouth. And this is where, you know, keeping the shapes really kind of soft. Trying not to overstate them. All right, let's see if I darken this. What brand of eraser do I use? This is a Staedtler rubber eraser. Honestly, I don't know what kind of kneaded eraser I have, what brand that is. So just trying to break the shape of the nose down a bit. Trying to give it a little bit more definition. Doesn't take much to really change. So what I did there is I found that I wasn't really looking when I made this mark. I just knew it existed, and that is generally a recipe for disaster. All right, let's see. Starting to pop off a little bit more. I feel like I kind of exaggerated this angle a little bit. And this eraser it's gotten black because it's been used a lot, but this is just a white eraser. This is a kneaded eraser that's picked up so much charcoal that it's really become black, but once you knead it again, you can see the light gray come out. The corner of the mouth shadows will assist me. I agree. I need to continue to resolve that. It's too light right now. But there is something in the eye shadow of the eye that is bothering me, and I need to figure out what that is. I appreciate all the comments, the observations here. So feel free to shout out as you see things that need to be adjusted. I feel like there's something still off in here. Let me try to find the angle of the eye. All right, maybe place the corner. This might need to come up a little bit. Trying only to draw the shadow shapes in there as much as possible. That feels a little bit better. Thank you, everybody. I see a lot of questions about the erasers. I'm kind of losing track of that, but if you still need some additional thoughts about that, let me know. All right. So the upper eyelid here, it's darker where the eyelashes are, and it casts a shadow on the eyeball. Because we're at a 3/4, the pupil, the iris are all kind of squished into an oval, a little bit darker at the top, a little bit lighter towards the bottom. Actually, what I want to do is utilize my shading stump to be rendering some of this. Trying to keep them relatively light. It's amazing what a difference I see on the screen versus what I'm seeing in front of me. Is that feeling a little bit better? Let's see. I think this hairline is also actually kind of throwing me off. Like that was kind of pulling the head in a weird way. Maybe kind of adjust this down a little bit. I'll have to correct that a little bit more later. And let's see. Let me try to draw this eye here, utilizing, and trying to keep my awareness on this eye over here. And then this eye really kind of squishes down into this oval. And then there's the upper eyelashes here. Trying to see that shape. Just looking for the darkest dark areas, and that really is over exaggerated. I can adjust that a little bit, maybe with the shading stump. Soften this up to find the eyebrow. Boy, that is really off, I can tell. So what I'm doing is as I'm trying to refine this, I'm losing track of the overall shape. So I want to kind of get back to that. Yeah, so then what I see happening, this needs to come out a little bit more. And then the forehead, along in here, I kind of lost a little bit. That's feeling a little bit better. The lips I need to come back to. How will I rescue the right cheek? This over here? Yeah, I need to resolve that. Again, this is where I really didn't do myself any favors by working so small here. I should have, in retrospect, used a larger sheet of paper, give myself a little bit more room to maneuver. No, that's not right. Okay. And here the upper eyelid becomes a little bit more dominant. You can see that I'm really just kind of bouncing around in the drawing. I feel like that works better. Trying to keep my lines light and loose. And you can see again just what subtle shifts can do. But I think in terms of this cheek, I want to resolve the values in the other parts of the drawing first, because I feel like this is kind of too dark, too harsh down in here. But if I get the values right in other parts of the drawing, I think I'm going to be in better shape. Try to find here. Lighten that maybe, and then might use a line in here to sharpen that edge. And that's not in the right spot. Just subtle shifts can make a big difference. I'm feeling happy about this line here. Something still seems really off here. Let's take that and that. In general, that's about right. Thank you for sticking with me throughout this. Top of the left cheekbone up here. Yeah, I need to, I haven't really rendered that part right in here a whole lot. Let me see if I can, yeah. I'm going to stick with this. This is part of the drawing process. So if you're following along, this is a bit longer than others. We're running an hour and a half at this point. Hopefully it's giving you some pointers, some tips. I think what happened is this mouth kind of migrated. So if I bring this underneath a little bit more, mouth almost seems like it's too big. The nose perhaps is still too short. Yeah. So Linda just said, oh my God, on a flat surface and my picture is vertical, I just picked it up and discovered the face is way short. Yeah, that's exactly what happens is like this, what I have to keep checking myself against is that when I'm looking at it at this angle, it looks correct. And I look at it up on the screen and it's way off. And so I need to figure out what is it that is off here. That's the challenge. That's why we do this, right? You know, we're here to sharpen our skills. We got to make mistakes in order to improve. All right. So in a way, what I'm actually going to end up doing is kind of drawing from the screen. I think might be more helpful. I feel like this is perhaps too big. The nose maybe is too small. So I wipe that out. One of the things I can do to check is I can take that corner of the eye to the tip of the nose. That's about right. is one of the reasons why I end up painting landscapes so much. It's a bit more forgiving, right, than a portrait. Everything is really, you know, there's so much at stake when you're doing a portrait. So what happened if we do this? Just kind of wipe that out. Almost start drawing the nose again. Let me darken that shadow. Wrap around here. I think perhaps I had made the lips, the mouth too big. Let's see if that's what was the problem. It is a pretty thin shape, and I think I had overstated them. I think that's ultimately the issue. I'm a pretty thin-lipped guy. So let's see what happens if we just take another stab at it, see what happens. What I want to do is I'm going to draw this lip. It gets thin there. Pull out the highlight there. Just trying to see this shape here. A little bit more visible under here. I don't know, how's that working? Is that doing any better? I've established that corner of the mouth, but I'm really kind of sneaking up on it. I'm feeling like that's a little bit better. You know, one of the things I didn't really put my attention on is the overall mouth shape, the lower lip. And I'm starting to see it a little bit better now. And then this eye shape still seems off. So we'll keep going. Irene is saying, you're looking like one of the property brothers on my page. Interesting. I think I can extend this out a little bit. Yeah, I think I lost the overall shadow shape. And so let me see what happens here if I draw this. Really try to observe the way this wraps around. There's kind of a flatness up here. Comes down along in here. I think I overstated this corner. So let's see. Yeah, I think this shadow shape is what I'm looking at. Need to bring that out a little bit more. think that's going to help with that eye. Shadow shape of mustache area above the mouth could be refined more. I completely agree. Good observation. That was Patricia. And then slightly too high, Dorothy. Yes, this eye right here. That is a really good observation, and that's something that I had in some of the preparatory drawings. That's an area where I struggled with as well. So I think it was a good observation. The slightest changes here, it's amazing what that does. I don't know if that helped at all. I kind of feel like what I need to do is erase out that. There's a little bit of light striking in on here in that upper eyelid on this eye. And then this shape in here is struggling. You know, trying not to draw the lines too much, because as I render the lines more, then it just makes it too heavy on the eye. So I don't know, is that a little bit better? I feel like that's a little bit better. What's your vine charcoal? Vine charcoal, that's this stuff here. It's literally the grapevine. So you can also find willow charcoal, which is, you know, they're vines and there's sticks of willow that are kind of baked in a kiln. I believe they kind of reduce the oxygen so that it doesn't just turn to ash. And that's literally what you're drawing with, is a stick of grapevine or a stick of willow. And it's a really nice soft material. It's a really great for laying out initial phases in the drawing. So I kind of over rendered the pupil there. Let's see how it holds up on the screen. All right, so now you can see, of course, we've done the eyes. How many times have we done it now? Multiple. Each time, hopefully, we get a little bit better. That's kind of part of the process. I really run into trouble when I quit too early. See what happens if I erase some of this light on the forehead. Is that feeling a little bit better? I feel like it's, I don't know, less creepy than it was before. So we'll see. I did draw this a couple times. So here's one that I did before, actually. Some issues with the proportions there. The eyes are still off a little bit. I feel like everything's kind of just too kind of rounded. So hopefully I'm going to be doing another version. Like, hopefully this one just kind of improves a bit more. But that's why we're doing this, right? Is we're just trying to improve our drawing skills overall. And I hope that this is kind of improved over my previous attempt. But I also know that it's all part of the process. I'm going to be doing this again I'm sure, and hopefully that one's going to get even better. You look at Rembrandt, how many self-portraits did he do? He just hundreds of them. And so you just do it. Do a bunch. All right, let's see. And it's interesting seeing the on the screen, the contrast is so much higher than what I'm seeing here, that I need to be aware of it. Like the darks are so much darker. And then let's see, the angle of the mouth. Bring that up a little bit. So thank you for joining me for today. I'm just going to keep working on this thing. Feel free to hang out as long as you want. You know, we're running an hour and a half, which is pretty long for these videos. Typically they run closer to an hour, hour and a quarter. But I'm kind of sucked into this one. I'd like to finish working on it. But if you're looking for more information, for more drawing resources, you know, check out artistnetwork.com. I've got a page there. You'll see a drawing together page that has additional resources. Defining that shadow shape a little bit more. But yeah, check out those additional resources if you're looking to kind of continue to build your skills. Hopefully this is getting a little bit better. But you can kind of see if you're joining us late, you know, we started kind of laying out the portrait, and we're kind of refining it. It's amazing. It looks so much more correct here. I look up at the screen and I see things that are just off, and I feel like this needs to come down here. That's why we do it. This is the part I love. You know, it gets so frustrating sometimes, but that's part of drawing. And when you can kind of power through it, that's an area of drawing that I really enjoy. That's kind of the sweet spot for me, is when you struggle. I had great teachers early on that, you know, almost described it as like it's like a battle. You got to get into the mud of it and then pull yourself back out. And I just really, I really connected with that. There's nothing like that feeling where you feel like everything's just going to fall apart on the page or on the canvas, and then you keep working on it, and then you get it. The areas the times in my drawing practice where I feel like I've really struggled is when I don't give myself the time, or I don't have the patience, and I quit too early. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. Is I'm in deep into this drawing, and I'm invested in trying to get it right. So stick with it, and even if this one just turns out to be mud, but I learned something about the proportions, or I learned something about the practice of drawing portraits, you know, that's a win. And that's too overstated. Huh. Hopefully that makes sense what I'm talking about, but maybe if I erase this down, do some negative drawing along in here. Is that getting any better? I hope it's getting better, at least. I feel like it's getting better. If not, this makes for an interesting drawing. All right, let's see. And there's this is really an interesting area here. I feel like I can kind of erase out the highlight a bit more in here. Maybe erase out some of this shape in here. All right. What age did I begin? That's really a tricky thing to identify. I mean, I feel like I've always drawn. That's just something I always did when I was younger. I had parents that gave me the tools so I could do that. And then of course my high school art teacher was influential, got me into art school. And then it was really in art school. I went to school in Baltimore where I could do it a lot. And I loved that. And, we'd be up 2, 3 in the morning just working on homework, and it never felt like work. And then I went to graduate school. Graduate school was really more about painting. So I have been, I've been drawing, making art for, very kind of consciously for almost 25 years. All right, so I feel like that's starting to get better. And I can kind of get back into some of the detail areas. Val says the eyes are perfect. Shadow beneath the nose may have to be more transparent, though. Yeah, I could see that. That's a good observation. Right under here, there's some bounce light. So if I look at the alternating sequence of light and dark, there's kind of a dark line. There's a little bit of bounce light. I need to be really careful. Lighten that up underneath there. Darken in the nostril. And just add a little bit more variety in under here. Having that stubble on there. I kind of regret not being clean shaven for this reference photo. I don't know what I was thinking there. But drawing is really I don't know, it's something that I feel like we don't do kind of enough, because what I often hear people do is they equate being at drawing with being an artist and identifying as an artist, which certainly as artists we should we should practice drawing, but everybody should draw, in my opinion. And I think saying that if you do a drawing that you have to identify and you have to be an artist, I think inhibits a lot of people just from enjoying it. It's just like dancing and saying that, all right, as soon as I start dancing, somehow that becomes my identity. No, it's just something fun you do. It's a way to learn about yourself and engage with other people. And so we're getting there. I feel like that's largely refined a bit, enough. And now I want to start to get back in and refine some of these other areas that are the ear is going to be kind of interesting. So if I'm happy with that base, one of the things I can do is I can kind of erase out some of the light. And I don't want to over render the ears. Yeah, I want to suggest them. Just erasing out some of the light areas for the ears. I'm going to shade that in again, and then I can come back in and if in one of the previous videos we actually drew an ear. So if you're looking for something that's more detailed, check out that video. Just kind of laying in the charcoal there, and then I'm going to refine it using the shading stump. And remember, when you're always drawing, you're always refining form. So whatever tool you have, you always want to think about always refining those shapes. Soften the mouth a fraction. I agree. I'm going to come back to that though. It's funny, like it's super soft in front of me here, and the contrast is kind of pumped up a little bit on the screen, and so I'm gonna come back into that a little bit. But I think that's a really good observation. So drawing hair now, I want to think about the overall shape. Starting to think about the cross hatching. Just kind of blocking in the shapes, starting to run my marks in the direction, kind of the grain of the hair. And I'm going to show you kind of the technique that I use for drawing hair. And this is where right in here. So it's not about rendering each and every strand. It's about getting that overall shape right. Softening it along the hairline. Thinking about the overall grain and suggesting it. But then watch what we can do here is we have light striking along the top of the head, right along here, along the hair, using the eraser to just kind of flick out some of the general shapes of that hair. And if you're gentle with it, then it also is kind of shading, it's kind of blending at the same time. So I don't want that hair to kind of jump off the page. Now going back in and kind of finding some of the darker areas now that I've lightened up some areas where the highlights are going to be. We're really going to dig into this next week. I think I'm going to be doing that on Monday, is drawing hair. And that's going to be ultimately to be the focus of it. There we go. So just kind of suggesting that a little bit. I don't want the hair to really hop off the page. Maybe smooth this out. Soften that up a little bit. All right, let's see. It's feeling a bit better. We might call it a day soon. Keeping the focal point in here, I want to kind of just be kind of looser, more sketchy with some of these outer areas. can do that here as well. Let's see, I kind of left that edge. This is an interesting form under here underneath that chin. Maybe I need to darken this just a little bit. And I feel like this is a bit harsh right up here. All right, check the cheek under the left eye, down near the mouth, the curves behind the mouth. Your face looks narrower in the photo. Yeah, I could see that there's something under here. It's not quite right. So what I want to look at is, I see the nose is over here, that point of the chin is just to the left. What's happening here? It's about right there. Looking at Linda's comment there. The face looks narrower in the photo. Yeah, I kind of agree. I need to figure out why that exactly is. I think maybe if I bring that in under here, I'll let that kind of transition. Maybe let that corner of the mouth wrap around. Anybody else see anything that's off that needs to be adjusted? What I can do is use this eraser, do some negative drawing here. And make that chin a little soft. That eraser just made a mark instead of erasing it. Laid down charcoal. I think I cut that out too much. Let me see if I take that out. Boy, there's a mark that it does not want to let go. All right, so shading stump now. I kind of overcut that jawline. Yeah, I feel like that's a little bit better. This cheekbone, I feel like that's, if I come down here, I look at this angle, that's where I think I can adjust it. Bring that down. And then maybe cut this out a little bit more. That's a really soft edge. Let me see what happens if I come back in with a charcoal pencil. Trying to be selective about where I place that line. I feel like that works out a little bit better. Actually, maybe I can see if I can lift off some here, get some reflected light in here. I'm kind of bouncing all over the place now. You're welcome, Val. Thank you for your comments here. Again, I'm just going to hang out here. Anybody who wants to give me some additional pointers, I am always open to them. It's one of the cool things about working from, during a live session like this. We just shot a video with a relatively young, new portrait artist, Nathaniel Skousen, does a classical portrait drawing. This young girl that, man, he did a really great job with it, and I learned quite a bit just from having him in the studio. My job at Artist Network is as a producer, so and I help direct that shoot, and so it helps me to learn quite a bit. And I find myself kind of with his voice in my head as I'm pulling this together, and really appreciating the talent of some of these great portrait artists. And just because it's just astounding how the slightest change can make a big impact on the drawing. Really trying to draw from the screen a bit because the contrast is so much greater. All right. Well, hopefully this gives you all a good sense of kind of the process for it. This is just how I do it. There's 100 different ways to pull a portrait together, but this is what works for me. I try to attack a portrait just like I would any other subject. And so this is very much how I would draw. I'm going to hopefully draw the skull in a very similar fashion. Let's see. That's going to happen on Friday. We meet every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Different subject every day. I don't know. I think that's working out all right. Yeah, so this is actually, if somebody's asking about the paper, this is the paper I'm using. It's this Hanamulla bamboo paper, which I'd never really heard of or drawn with before, but I'm actually really enjoying it with charcoal. What have we got going on here? Let's see. But I feel like it's a little bit better at least. There was a stage there, man. So this is something I talk about in other videos as well, as this concept of the ugly duckling stage. And every drawing I find goes through that. You're in the mud of the drawing, and you're like, is this really going to happen? Is this ever going to come together? And I have to say that was that happened here in this drawing in a very profound way. I'm like, this is not going to come together the way it was looking. But I still see issues that I'd like to address, but overall, I feel like it captures the overall essence. It gets it's a decent portrait rather than one that is nightmare-inducing. But again, you got to be kind to yourself. I need to remind myself of that as well. If you're following along and you're just not happy with it, just be kind, because it's all part of the process. You got to make bad drawings. I had a semester where I told my professor, I said, look, I'm really struggling right now because I show up to class and all of a sudden my objective is to have the best drawing during the critique. And it's messing with my head. Because it started to become competitive. And I asked him, I said, hey, look, can I just spend this semester making bad drawings? Can I have that permission? And he said, absolutely. And I think about that often, because it was so freeing to hear from the instructor that making bad drawings is okay. I put so much pressure on myself because I felt like I had to prove myself in class, and I found that it was not healthy for me, and so I was really grateful for that instructor. And so what I did in terms of making bad drawings is I tried to I tried to utilize new materials, new paper, new pencils, using Conte a lot, that was a lot of fun. And it was rough, and it was the drawings were far more aggressive. They weren't delicate and refined. And I learned so much about how materials work. And none of the drawings I felt like I would want to show to anybody. But again, it was really freeing just to to hear someone say, it's okay, and it's encouraged to make bad art, bad drawings. Bad as I had defined it in my head. So there you have it. When did I start? I've been running for 2 hours. This is the longest one yet. Started 3 p.m. Eastern. You can, if you're coming in late, you can watch the whole video. It's going to be going up shortly after this is done. Need to soften that a little bit. Maybe pull this highlight out. All right, but I think I'm just about done for today. Like I said, I'm feeling a little bit better. Hopefully you all have enjoyed this. Thanks for sticking around. This was a long one. Would it be easier if this was a black and white photo? I think it would have been easier, but that's really part of the process, is trying to interpret the color as value. And I really encourage everybody to be working from life. So if you're if you're drawing along, ideally you'd be creating your own self-portrait with a mirror set up. If I had done that for this, it would have looked completely different. I just, there's so much more going on, but you're going to learn so much about drawing. You're going to be learning so much about yourself as an artist by working from life. Then working from a color photograph can be helpful beyond that. Because then you're interpreting value a bit in a different way. Let me get back in here and kind of refine this down. And I feel like that works a little bit better. Oh, last thing I want to do, maybe I want to pull out that, this is a white chalk pencil, maybe pull out a kind of a glint in the eye. Pull out the highlight on the tip of the nose, bring that forward. I want that to be light in value. Just trying to think through some of these areas where I could lighten them up a little bit. And it's feeling a little bit better. I think I can get a little highlight along in here. And if that's not quite enough, I can come back in with this white chalk and indicate that. And that helps to pull that out a little bit. And it's really wild to see it on the screen because it comes out so much more on the screen than it does in front of me. Everything I can't see that chalk at all, but when I see it on the screen, it really pops out. So hopefully that helps. Does the darkness of the left shoulder change the overall appearance? Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation. Yeah, I think so. You want to be looking right now. This is just kind of soft and atmospheric, so maybe I need to add a little bit more definition here. Maybe add some more here, but it helps to create an overall kind of calibration of the values, having your darkest darks be established. So I think it's helpful to have areas of really rich dark. But I don't want to have any kind of solid detail in this corner to draw my attention away. I think selective focus can be really helpful in a portrait, letting some areas be soft. and subtle. Make the faces appear slimmer. So the shadow on the left side, yeah, I guess it could. It does feel a bit, I think what I did in the proportions, I feel like I kind of squished everything. But I think I'm gonna call it a day. And call it good enough, knowing that I, knowing that there's areas that could be improved. Maybe it's a matter of bringing in the ear or something. But like I said, I think I'm going to call it a day. I'm feeling like I learned quite a bit. Hopefully you all did as well. Kind of about the drawing process, about drawing portraits in general. Join me on Friday. I'll be drawing a skull. That's going to be a lot of fun. So, yeah, you're talking about the cheekbone. Yeah. Yeah, I think I kind of overstated that. I don't know. Like I said, I might keep working on it a little bit, but I feel like I've learned quite a bit. I'm going to tap out. I think maybe set it aside, look at it again from a distance, come back in a day or two, see what needs to be improved, and kind of go from there. So I appreciate you all being here. I look forward to Friday's session. Join me again on Monday as well, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and have a great day.